questions, talk about the stuff you guys are interested in, and really just seeing the city and the region as a whole here. You guys are on the good tour. We're getting out of downtown Seattle. We're really going to see a lot of the city here ahead of us. I'm excited to really share it all with you guys. A little bit about myself before we jump right into things. I'm not actually originally from Seattle. I've lived out here for about 5 years now, but I actually grew up out in Massachusetts, all the way out there on the East Coast. Bopped around the country after college a little bit. Actually came out here from New York City, about 5 years ago. And the reason why I'm out here is just because I think the Pacific Northwest might very well be one of the more beautiful places really in the whole world. So I'm excited to share it with you guys. We're going to talk about a lot more than just downtown Seattle. We're going to kind of cover, like I said, the region, the city, the mountains, the ocean. We'll talk about a lot of my favorite places around the city. Really just kind of the whole shebang here. So, well, actually, to start things off, I just want to get a feel for this group real quick. So actually raise your hand, and I can see everybody up here on the top deck. So raise your hand if this is actually your first time here in Seattle. Okay. That's a lot of us on board, so exciting. How about locals? Local Seattleites on board? Okay, a handful as well. Awesome. Yeah, I really like giving this tour in particular because we actually get a good mix of locals and visitors alike. Everybody wants to go through the locks. It's a cool thing, whether you've lived here your whole life or if you're just setting foot in town. That all said, yeah, welcome once again. And let's just jump right into things here. Let's start off with a little bit of lay of the land and actually a little bit of kind of lay of the tour here. Right now we're heading north out of the central waterfront in Elliott Bay. Elliott Bay is an inlet of the Puget Sound. Puget Sound is the body of water that we're currently traveling on right now, and the Sound is actually an inlet of the Pacific Ocean itself. So coming in through the north, through the Strait of Juan de Fuca and the Georgia Strait up there to our north, we have these two big inlets of the Pacific Ocean, bringing that seawater to us down here in the Puget Sound. This is one big inlet, one big marginal sea. If you really want to get technical, we'll hear that term, kind of use them a little bit interchangeably here, the Salish Sea and the Puget Sound. We're in the Puget Sound portion of the Salish Sea right now. Now that said, the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea are actually some of the most biodiverse waters in the entire North Pacific Ocean, like overall. What that means, keep those eyes peeled for wildlife here on this tour. I make zero promises, but the more sets of eyes we have looking, the better our chances. I will say, definitely, we have a pretty high chance of seeing some porpoises, maybe some seals, maybe some sea lions if we're lucky. Just last week, actually, we saw some bottlenose dolphins out here, which are extremely rare in these waters, so it's pretty cool. And the occasional whale. A couple weeks ago, we had 2 humpbacks actually pass right through the bay here. So the chances aren't zero, but they are slim. So keep those eyes peeled. We'll talk about wildlife, whether we see anything or not. If we do strike out, actually way back there, we just passed the Seattle Aquarium, 100% chance back there. So you can have that in your back pocket if we really don't get too lucky here on the tour. With that though, we're on the first part of this tour. The tour has 2 parts, a freshwater part, which is the latter half, and the current section here, which is the saltwater part. So Seattle itself has these 2 sections of the city. Here we are on the west side of town, here in the Puget Sound, this oceanic inlet. On the other side of the city is Lake Washington, one of the biggest freshwater lakes here in the state that forms the entire eastern shore of Seattle. So Seattle's an isthmus, that's a strip of land with water on 2 sides as opposed to. There in the foreground is the Olympic Sculpture Park, another really cool area of the city to explore. This is actually an extension of the Seattle Art Museum, but this is free to visit, unlike the museums themselves. So you can actually walk into the Sculpture Park down here whenever. But let's look at the Space Needle here. We're going to talk a little bit more about our buildings kind of as we cruise up north here a bit. But right now, let's just look at this building sort of contrast to the rest of the downtown skyline. Well, for one, it's actually north of downtown. Sits here in the lower Queen neighborhood. It's the Seattle Center complex here. That's actually where the old World's Fair used to take place. Now, when they built the Space Needle back in 1962, that was actually the tallest building west of the Mississippi. But today, at 605 feet tall, it's actually not even on the list. It's actually the 9th tallest building in Seattle today. But yeah, most of these big buildings built for World's Fairs were designed to be temporary. There's actually just a handful of buildings around the world that were built for World's Fairs but actually stuck around after. One, of course, being the Space Needle. Another that comes to mind would actually be the Eiffel Tower in Paris, built for the 1889 World's Fair. So yeah, handful of really iconic towers around the world. The Space Needle definitely still has the spot, but when it was built, it was kind of one of the West Coast's first big skyscrapers. From Kerry Park. Anyone been to Kerry Park? Kerry? Anyone? A few up on the bow? Okay, not enough hands though. And a lot of city lights are coming on, go up there, catch a sunset. It's just a really, really cool little park. We call them pocket parks. There's lots of these tiny little parks all around the city. It's just a really beautiful view up there. And on top of the hill, a lot of great restaurants and bars up Queen Anne Ave, maybe a 10-minute walk from the park itself.
Even though we've lived in the Central District for 5 years.
Alright, working our way north here. We're actually cruising up the waterfront further. Working our way behind Queen Anne Hill. We have something that definitely flies under the radar a little bit. But for even locals here in Seattle, this is our grain export terminal here. A lot of people don't even realize this is back here, or don't really notice it, or don't know what it is, but it's really a big part of our maritime industry here. We export more grain than any other city on the U.S. West Coast for the simple reason that we're just the closest port city to East Asia. Yeah, we save about 1 to 3 days in that Pacific crossing time than any other city on the contiguous U.S. coast. So we don't produce grain in the Western Cascades. It's a rugged, mountainous, and forested region out here, but we export most of that U.S. Midwest grain that's heading out to East Asia. So yeah, these big silos here are filled up with millions and millions of bushels of grain from train cars coming from the U.S. Midwest. We don't have a grain ship in right now, but we typically will see these 1,000-foot bulk carriers that come in and then head out across the ocean. One of the things that, yeah, definitely flies under the radar a little bit here in town. Cruising north, as we work our way up past the grain terminal, we see this pretty sizable office complex here. This is actually one of Seattle's many, many tech companies. So yeah, we're not really known for our grain, but we are certainly known for tech. This is actually the Expedia.com, the whole Expedia group headquarters here, one of Seattle's many tech companies. This little nook down here is interesting though. So this is what we call Interbay. So if you look here on the back side of Queen Anne Hill, you're going to see coming up off the right another neighborhood there, the big hill past it. That's the neighborhood of Magnolia off the front right. This little nook down here is Interbay, and then the little cove is Smith Cove. Now, I mentioned Seattle sits on an isthmus. An isthmus, again, strip of land with water on two sides. Now, when early city planners were looking at places to actually build the Lake Washington Ship Canal, they had a few places in mind, and this was actually one of them. Now, they ended up not doing this way. They ended up going a little bit further north, where we're actually going to go. But what today is Smith Cove, and Pier 90 and Pier 91 used to be, or was a top contender on the running for a route of the Lake Washington Ship Canal where the Ballard Locks would have been, or they wouldn't be called the Ballard Locks in that case. But all that said, this was decided against for a few reasons that we'll cover. But it's interesting just to kind of imagine that what it could have been. But now this area is a little bit different. Pier 90 and Pier 91 here actually used to be a naval base. It was actually one of the primary naval bases on the U.S. West Coast during World War II, and then it held up until 2006 when they officially decommissioned it, moved those Navy ships out across the water over to Bremerton on the other side of the Puget Sound. They converted these two piers into two very distinct uses. For one, directly here off the right, one of the beige warehouses there, that's mostly cold storage for the bulk of the North Pacific fishing fleet. Just a quick show of hands here on this boat again. Raise your hand if you've ever had the fish Alaskan pollock before. Okay, a few hands, maybe like... Alright, so we are actually about to do a little pivot here. Thank you, Captain Amy, reading my mind. You didn't even have to ask. But we're going to turn to ports, and we're going to get a beautiful view of downtown Seattle here. So let's look off the left-hand side of the boat so we don't need to crane our necks to that. And we get this beautiful view of our skyline. So I'm going to run through some buildings real quick. So once again, starting with the stories 967 feet above the ground. The Rainier Square Tower is 58 stories. That's the one right in the middle of the skyline. 58 stories, 850 feet tall. Now, it looks like they top out at the same level, and they do. Both those towers there top out at 1,000 feet above sea level because they're taking into account the hill in which they're built on. Both of those towers actually were planned to be well over 1,000 feet, especially the Columbia Tower. The Columbia Tower there all the way off to the right was slated to be one of the tallest buildings in the country when it was being built in the 80s. They leased out all 76 stories, and today it is the tallest building on the West Coast by story, not by height. But they had leased out all 76 stories, and they got a little bit of a nasty letter from the FAA. The FAA said, hey, if you exceed 1,000 feet elevation, you're going to be in the airspace of a few big airports nearby. and we're probably going to sue you. So what they ended up doing, instead of deleting a floor, because they had everything leased, they took 6 inches off every single floor and they squished it. So today we call it the shortest, tallest tower on the West Coast, because once again, more stories than any building out here, but the 4th tallest, not the actual tallest. The Rainier Square Tower, the glassy one right in the center of the skyline, that is the tallest residential tower on the West Coast. But 800 to which they on which they sit. There is no landslide insurance offered in Magnolia, but that's just kind of the gamble you take. This is definitely some of the more beautiful waterfront real estate here in the city, and probably every 5 to 10 years there's a sizable landslide. These big bluffs that we're looking at here are actually all composed of glacial till, which is just like loose rock, sandy clay left over here after the last ice age. But yeah, beautiful neighborhood, mostly residential. It's home to one of my favorite parks here in the city, though, which we're actually going to cruise past in a little bit here, so we'll talk about it a pretty good amount. But yeah, it's a really great neighborhood here. These beautiful